The notification chimed on my phone at exactly 3:47 a.m. I knew without looking that it was Patricia Martinez calling again. This marked the 14th attempt in the past 6 hours since Forbes had published their annual 30 Under 30 Tech Entrepreneurs list, with my company Streamline AI valued at $180 million. The same woman who had refused to attend my wedding 18 months ago, claiming I wasn't good enough for her precious son, was now desperately trying to reach me. I let it go. To voicemail again, just like the other 13 calls. The irony wasn't lost on me that the dirt-poor farm girl from Cedar Falls, Iowa, whom she had dismissed as unworthy, was now featured on the cover of 3 major business magazines in a single week. Patricia Martinez, who had spent 2 years telling anyone who would listen that her son David was throwing his life away by marrying beneath his station, was about to discover just how wrong she had been. But this story doesn't begin with my triumph. It starts in the cramped break room of a struggling marketing firm in downtown Denver, where I first met David Martinez over burnt coffee and shared complaints about our demanding bosses. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Thompson, though everyone calls me Jess, and 3 years ago I was just another 26-year-old trying to make it in the tech world, while juggling 2 part-time jobs to pay rent on a studio apartment that barely qualified as habitable. Most people who know me now, who see the sleek offices of Streamline AI or read about my company's latest acquisition, assume I came from money or had some kind of privileged background. The truth is far more complicated and infinitely more satisfying. I grew up on a corn farm in Cedar Falls, Iowa, population 3,147 on a good day when everyone was actually in town. My father, Jim Thompson, worked 16-hour days trying to keep our family farm profitable against corporate agriculture giants that could undercut our prices without breaking a sweat. My mother, Carol, taught elementary school and spent her evenings doing bookkeeping for local businesses to bring in extra income. We weren't poor exactly, but money was always tight, and luxuries were rare. The farmhouse where I spent my childhood had drafty windows that we covered with plastic sheeting every winter, and a furnace that broke down at least twice each season. My clothes came from thrift stores or hand-me-downs from cousins, and family vacations meant camping at the state park 20 miles away. But my parents instilled in me something more valuable than money, the belief that intelligence and hard work could overcome any obstacle. I discovered computers when I was 12 years old through a program at the local library that provided free internet access to kids after school. While other girls my age were obsessing over boy bands and makeup, I was teaching myself basic programming languages and spending hours exploring the endless possibilities of technology. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, noticed my passion and connected me with a computer science professor at the University of Northern Iowa who agreed to mentor me through email. By the time I graduated high school, I had already built 3 functioning websites for local businesses and created a simple inventory management system for my father's farm equipment. I earned a full scholarship to the University of Colorado, choosing their computer science program over several other options because Denver represented everything Cedar Falls wasn't: opportunity, innovation, and the chance to reinvent myself. College was a culture shock that nearly broke me during the first semester. My classmates talked casually about spring break trips to Europe and summer internships at their parents' companies, while I worked 20 hours a week in the campus cafeteria to afford textbooks. The technology they owned made my second-hand laptop look ancient, and their casual confidence in networking situations highlighted how little I understood about professional social dynamics. But I adapted, the way farm kids learn to adapt to everything. I studied harder than anyone else, volunteered for every challenging project, and slowly built relationships with professors who appreciated my work ethic over my pedigree. By junior year, I was leading study groups and tutoring students who had initially dismissed me as too rural to understand sophisticated concepts. My breakthrough came during senior year when I developed an algorithm for optimizing supply chain logistics as part of my capstone project. What started as an academic exercise turned into something revolutionary when I realized that my solution could save major retailers millions of dollars in shipping costs and inventory management. While my classmates were preparing for traditional job interviews, I was filing for my first patent and researching how to turn my algorithm into a viable business. After graduation, I moved to Denver with $3,000 in savings, a detailed business plan, and the kind of naive confidence that only comes from not fully understanding how difficult starting a company actually is. I rented a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood and took a part-time job doing data entry for a logistics company to pay bills while I refined my algorithm and searched for investors. The rejection letters from venture capital firms piled up throughout my first year in Denver. Meeting after meeting ended with polite dismissals that often felt tinged with skepticism about my background and age. Several investors told me directly that my idea was too complex for someone without industry experience to execute properly. Others suggested I consider licensing my algorithm to established companies rather than trying to build my own business. I was beginning to doubt myself when I landed a second part-time position doing freelance marketing consulting for small businesses. The work wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than data entry and gave me insight into how different types of my companies operated. It was through this job that I met Rachel Chen, who would eventually become my business partner and closest friend. Rachel was everything I wasn't: sophisticated, well-connected, and armed with an MBA from Northwestern. She had moved to Denver to work for a consulting firm, but was growing frustrated with corporate limitations on innovation. We met during a networking event that I had attended reluctantly, wearing my only professional dress and feeling completely out of place among the polished crowd. While I was standing awkwardly by the refreshment table, trying to work up the courage to introduce myself to other attendees, Rachel approached me with a directness that I found refreshing. She had overheard me explaining my algorithm to another person and wanted to understand how it worked. That conversation turned into a 3-hour discussion at a nearby coffee shop, during which Rachel grasped the potential of my technology better than any investor I had pitched. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rachel became my advocate, my translator between the world I came from and the world I was trying to enter. She understood how to present my algorithm in terms that investors could appreciate, how to position my farm background as an asset rather than a liability, and how to navigate the social aspects of business that had always mystified me. 6 months after we met, she left her consulting job to join me in founding Streamline AI. Our first office was a shared workspace in an old warehouse that housed a dozen other startups. We had 2 desks, 3 computers, and a business plan that had been refined through countless iterations. Rachel handled the business development and investor relations, while I focused on developing our software platform and building the technical infrastructure we would need to scale. The early days were exhausting, but exhilarating. We worked 12-hour days, lived on coffee and takeout, and celebrated small victories like signing our first pilot customer or debugging a particularly complex piece of code. Money was constantly tight, and we both took significant pay cuts compared to what we could have earned at established companies. But we believed in what we were building. It was during this period of 16-hour days and ramen noodle dinners that I met David Martinez. I was working late in our shared office space, trying to resolve a server issue that was affecting our beta testing program, when I decided to take a break and grab some coffee from the vending machine in the building's lobby. The machine ate my dollar bill, and I was standing there contemplating whether to risk another dollar when someone behind me said, "That machine has been broken for 3 weeks, but the building management keeps promising to fix it." I turned around to find a tall man with dark hair and an easy smile, wearing a well-tailored suit that suggested he worked somewhere more established than the startup floor. He introduced himself as David Martinez and explained that he worked for Thompson and Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm that occupied the building's 3rd floor. Without hesitation, he offered to buy me coffee from the much better machine on his floor. David was charming in a way that felt genuine rather than calculated. He asked thoughtful questions about my work without the condescending tone I had grown accustomed to from men in professional settings. When I explained that I was developing logistics software, he didn't immediately pivot to talking about himself or dismiss my work as too technical to understand. Instead, he wanted to know how the technology worked and what problems it solved. That first conversation in the lobby lasted 20 minutes and ended with David asking if he could take me to dinner to continue our discussion about the intersection of technology and marketing. I almost said no, partly because I was exhausted from work, and partly because I wasn't sure if this was professional interest or personal attraction. But something about his directness convinced me to say yes. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant near downtown Denver that David claimed had the best pasta in the city. He was right about the food, but more importantly, he was genuinely interested in hearing about my background and my business goals. When I told him about growing up on a farm in Iowa, he didn't make jokes about being a country girl or express surprise that someone from rural America could understand complex technology. David told me about his own background that night, painting, a picture of upper-middle-class stability that felt foreign to my experience. His father, Robert, owned a successful construction company that specialized in commercial projects, while his mother, Patricia, had built a reputation as one of Denver's top real estate agents. David had grown up in Cherry Hills Village, attended private schools, and graduated from the University of Denver with a business degree before joining Thompson and Associates. The contrast between our backgrounds was obvious, but David didn't seem to view it as an obstacle. He was fascinated by my journey from Cedar Falls to Denver and impressed by my determination to build a company from scratch. When I expressed concern about whether I was sophisticated enough for Denver's business community, he assured me that authenticity was more valuable than artificial polish. Our relationship developed gradually over the following months. David would often stop by our office in the evenings when he knew I was working late, bringing dinner or just providing a distraction from the endless cycle of coding and testing. He became genuinely invested in Streamline AI's success, offering marketing insights and helping Rachel and me practice our investor pitches. Rachel liked David immediately, which meant a lot to me since her judgment about people was usually excellent. She appreciated that he supported my work without trying to take credit or insert himself into business decisions. More importantly, she noticed that he made me happier and more confident in social situations where I had previously felt awkward. David's enthusiasm for my work extended to introducing me to his professional network. He arranged meetings with potential clients at his marketing firm and connected me with several small business owners who might benefit from our logistics platform. These introductions were valuable not just for business development, but for building my confidence in presenting my ideas to strangers. After 6 months of dating, David suggested that I meet his family. He had been to Cedar Falls twice to visit my parents, who had welcomed him warmly despite their initial surprise that their daughter was dating someone from such a different background. My father appreciated David's willingness to help with farm work during his visits, while my mother was charmed by his interest in her teaching stories and his genuine curiosity about small-town life. David's description of his family had prepared me to expect people who were successful and somewhat formal, but he had emphasized their warmth and inclusiveness. He told me repeatedly that his parents would love me once they understood how brilliant and driven I was. According to David, his family valued hard work and determination above social status, and they would appreciate my entrepreneurial spirit. I was nervous but optimistic when David arranged for me to join his family for Sunday dinner at their home in Cherry Hills Village. The house was impressive without being ostentatious. A large Tudor-style home with manicured landscaping and the kind of understated elegance that suggests old money even when it isn't. David had prepared me for the formality of the setting, but I had chosen my outfit carefully and felt confident that I could hold my own in any conversation. Patricia Martinez answered the door herself, and my first impression was of a woman who took great care with her appearance and expected others to do the same. She was impeccably dressed in what I would later learn was a Chanel suit, with perfectly styled silver hair and jewelry that was clearly expensive but not flashy. Her smile was polite but didn't quite reach her eyes as she greeted me. Robert Martinez was more immediately welcoming, offering a firm handshake and genuine enthusiasm about meeting the woman who had captured his son's attention. He asked thoughtful questions about my business and seemed genuinely impressed when I described the potential applications of our logistics software. Throughout dinner, he treated me as an equal participant in the conversation rather than a curiosity to be examined. Amanda Martinez Wilson, David's sister, was politely friendly, but seemed more interested in discussing her recent vacation to Napa Valley than learning about my background or work. Her husband Kevin was pleasant, but largely silent, nodding along with conversations without contributing much substance. The dynamic felt comfortable enough, though I noticed that Patricia remained somewhat reserved throughout the meal. The conversation during dinner ranged from local politics to travel experiences to business trends in Denver. I contributed where I could, sharing insights about technology and entrepreneurship while asking questions about topics outside my expertise. David seemed pleased with how the evening was progressing, and his father appeared genuinely interested in my perspectives on business development. It wasn't until after dinner, when the men had moved to Robert's study to discuss some construction project, that I had my first real conversation alone with Patricia. She suggested that we sit on the back patio with coffee, and I thought this might be an opportunity to build a more personal connection with David's mother. Patricia's questions started innocuously enough. She wanted to know about my family background, my education, and my plans for the future. I answered honestly, describing my parents' work, my scholarship to college, and my hopes for growing Streamline AI into a major technology company. Patricia listened politely, occasionally asking follow-up questions that seemed designed to understand my social and economic background rather than my personal character. The conversation took a subtle but unmistakable turn when Patricia began, discussing David's previous relationships. She mentioned his college girlfriend Sarah, who came from a prominent Denver family and now worked for a prestigious law firm. She talked about how well Sarah had fit into their social circle and how much the family had enjoyed her company during the 2 years she and David had dated. Patricia's message was clear without being explicitly stated. David had a history of dating women from backgrounds similar to his own, and I represented a departure from that pattern. She didn't directly criticize me or my background, but her questions about my long-term goals and my understanding of the expectations that came with being part of their family felt like a test I was failing simply by being myself. When David and I left that evening, he was enthusiastic about how well the dinner had gone. He had noticed his father's positive response to me and interpreted his mother's reserved demeanor as her usual caution with new people rather than specific disapproval. I didn't want to dampen his optimism by sharing my concerns about Patricia's subtle hostility, so I agreed that the evening had been successful. Over the following months, David included me in more family gatherings and social events within his parents' circle. Patricia's treatment of me remained consistently polite but cool, with occasional comments that felt designed to highlight my outsider status. She would make references to people and places I didn't know, discuss social events I hadn't attended, and share family stories that emphasized their long history in Denver's established community. The most telling incident occurred during a dinner party Patricia hosted for her real estate colleagues and clients. David had encouraged me to attend, believing it would be good for my business to meet successful professionals in different industries. I had prepared carefully, researching the guests and thinking through how to present Streamline AI's services in terms that would resonate with real estate professionals. Throughout the evening, Patricia introduced me to guests as David's friend from Iowa who started a little computer company. The diminutive language was subtle, but unmistakable, particularly compared to how she introduced other guests with their full professional credentials and accomplishments. When people asked about my work, Patricia would quickly pivot the conversation to other topics, effectively preventing me from building any meaningful professional connections. David didn't notice these subtle undermining tactics because they were deployed when he was engaged in other conversations. When I mentioned my concerns to him later, he suggested that I might be overthinking his mother's behavior, and that she was probably just trying to protect me from business conversations that might be boring or irrelevant to my work. The pattern continued and escalated over the following year. Patricia would invite David to family events and social gatherings, while making it clear that my presence wasn't expected or desired. She would schedule family dinners on nights when she knew I had important business meetings, forcing David to choose between supporting my career and maintaining family harmony. Most often, he chose his family. The breaking point came when David and I had been dating for almost 2 years and began discussing marriage seriously. Streamline AI was gaining traction in the market. We had secured our first major client, and Rachel and I were preparing for a significant funding round that would allow us to expand our operations. Professionally, I was more confident than ever. And personally, I believed that David and I had built a strong foundation for a future together. David proposed on a weekend trip to Aspen, presenting me with a beautiful ring that he had chosen carefully based on conversations about my preferences. I said yes immediately, overwhelmed with happiness and excitement about building a life together with someone who understood and supported my ambitions. David was equally enthusiastic, talking about our wedding plans and our future as partners, in every sense of the word. We decided to share the news with his family first, since they lived nearby and we could tell them in person. David called ahead to arrange a family dinner, telling his parents that we had important news to share. I was nervous but optimistic, hoping that our engagement might mark a turning point in my relationship with Patricia and that she would welcome me more fully into the family. The dinner started well enough, with Robert and Amanda expressing genuine excitement about our engagement and asking to see the ring. Robert toasted our future together and talked about how happy David seemed since we had been together. Amanda immediately began discussing potential wedding venues and asking about our timeline for planning the ceremony. Patricia's response was markedly different. She congratulated us politely, but without enthusiasm, and her questions focused on practical concerns rather than celebratory details. She wanted to know about our timeline, our budget, and our plans for the ceremony. When David mentioned that we were hoping to have the wedding in about 6 months, Patricia suggested that we might want to wait longer to ensure proper planning. The conversation became increasingly tense as Patricia raised concerns about everything, from the guest list to the venue selection. She questioned whether we had thought through the social implications of our different backgrounds and suggested that we might want to consider a small, private ceremony rather than a large celebration that would draw attention to our mismatched families. David tried to redirect the conversation toward positive aspects of our relationship and our shared goals for the future. He emphasized my professional success and my strong character, pointing out that I had built a thriving business from nothing and earned the respect of clients and colleagues throughout Denver. His advocacy meant everything to me, but it seemed to have little impact on his mother's reservations. The evening ended with polite congratulations and promises to discuss wedding plans in more detail later. Patricia hugged me goodbye with the same restrained warmth she had shown since our first meeting, and I left feeling that our engagement had created more tension than joy within David's family. David remained optimistic, assuring me that his mother needed time to adjust to the idea and that she would come around once she saw how committed we were to each other. Over the following weeks, it became clear that Patricia had no intention of coming around. She made no effort to include me in wedding planning discussions, despite the fact that David wanted his family to be heavily involved in the ceremony. When I suggested meeting with her to discuss details like flowers or music, she was always too busy with work or other commitments. More concerning was Patricia's increasing criticism of our timeline and our plans for a traditional wedding ceremony. She suggested repeatedly that we consider eloping or having a very small ceremony that wouldn't require extensive planning or significant financial investment. When David pushed back on these suggestions, Patricia questioned whether we were ready. for marriage given our different backgrounds and career priorities. The situation reached a crisis point when we began sending save-the-date announcements to family and friends. David's side of the guest list included extended family members, family friends, and professional colleagues whom he wanted to celebrate with us. Patricia had initially agreed to help us compile addresses and contact information for David's relatives, but she repeatedly delayed providing the information we needed. When David finally pressed his mother for the family contact list, Patricia revealed the depth of her opposition to our wedding. She told David that she couldn't in good conscience help plan a celebration for a marriage that she believed was destined to fail. According to Patricia, our different backgrounds and social circles made us fundamentally incompatible, and she felt that David was making a mistake that would hurt both of us in the long run. David was devastated by his mother's honesty, but he remained committed to our relationship and our wedding plans. He told Patricia that her approval wasn't required for us to be happy together, and that her refusal to support our marriage was damaging their relationship. Patricia responded that she hoped time would prove her wrong, but she couldn't pretend to be enthusiastic about a decision she viewed as misguided. The final blow came 3 weeks before our wedding date. Patricia called David to inform him that she and Robert would not be attending the ceremony. She claimed that their presence would be hypocritical given their concerns about the marriage, and she felt that it would be better for everyone if they stepped aside, rather than participated in a celebration they couldn't support. David was heartbroken by his parents' decision, but he refused to postpone or cancel our wedding to accommodate their objections. We proceeded with our plans, adjusting the seating arrangements and the family involvement in the ceremony to account for the absence of David's parents. Robert called David privately to express his regret about the situation, but he ultimately supported Patricia's decision to boycott the wedding. The wedding itself was beautiful, despite the family drama surrounding it. My parents traveled from Iowa and were wonderful ambassadors for the values and warmth that had shaped me. Rachel served as my maid of honor and gave a speech that brought everyone to tears with its description of our friendship and my journey from farm girl to successful entrepreneur. David's extended family and friends who attended were gracious and welcoming, making it clear that Patricia's hostility didn't represent the entire Martinez family perspective. But the absence of David's parents cast a shadow over what should have been the happiest day of our lives. During the ceremony, I couldn't help but notice the empty seats where they should have been sitting. At the reception, other guests asked about their absence, forcing us to make awkward explanations about scheduling conflicts rather than admitting the truth about their boycott. David handled the situation with grace and dignity, but I knew he was deeply hurt by his parents' choice to prioritize their social prejudices over their son's happiness. Throughout our honeymoon, he remained optimistic that time would heal the rift, and that Patricia would eventually accept our marriage once she saw how committed we were to each other. I was less optimistic about the prospects for reconciliation, but I focused on building our life together, rather than dwelling on family drama. Streamline AI was approaching a major milestone with our Series A funding round, and I threw myself into preparing for investor meetings and developing our growth strategy. David continued to support my work while building his own career, and we established a comfortable routine as newlyweds. The funding round exceeded our most optimistic projections. 3 venture capital firms bid for the opportunity to invest in Streamline AI, driving our valuation significantly higher than Rachel and I had anticipated. We ultimately accepted a $15 million investment that valued our company at $60 million and positioned us to expand into new markets across the country. The success brought media attention that I had never experienced before. Technology publications featured articles about Streamline AI's innovative approach to logistics optimization, and I was invited to speak at conferences and industry events about entrepreneurship and innovation. Several business magazines included me in their profiles of rising stars in the Denver tech scene. David was incredibly proud of my success and supportive of the increased demands on my time and attention. He attended industry events with me, when appropriate, and helped me navigate the social aspects of sudden professional prominence. His marketing expertise proved valuable as we developed our brand and public messaging strategy. Throughout this period of rapid growth and recognition, David maintained minimal contact with his parents. Patricia had made a few attempts to reach out to him, but their conversations were strained and brief. She never acknowledged the wedding boycott or expressed any interest in building a relationship with me. David was hurt, but resigned to the situation, focusing on our marriage and our respective careers, rather than trying to force a reconciliation. The breakthrough moment came exactly 18 months after our wedding, when Forbes announced their annual 30 Under 30 list of the most promising young entrepreneurs across various industries. Rachel and I both made the technology category, with a feature article that detailed Streamline AI's meteoric rise and our projected growth trajectory. The Forbes article revealed for the first time that our company's valuation had reached $180 million following a recent expansion into international markets. The piece described me as a visionary leader who transformed a college algorithm into a logistics revolution, and projected that Streamline AI would go public within the next 2 years at a valuation exceeding $1 billion. The media coverage was overwhelming and immediate. Phone calls came from reporters, investors, and potential clients who wanted to understand how a young woman from Iowa had built such a successful company in less than 3 years. The attention was flattering but exhausting, and I was grateful for David's help in managing the requests and maintaining some semblance of normal life. It was in the midst of this media frenzy that Patricia Martinez began calling my phone at all hours, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails asking me to call her back. The woman who had refused to attend my wedding and had treated me with barely concealed contempt for 3 years was suddenly eager to have a conversation about family relationships and mutual respect. I didn't return her calls. The silence I maintained toward Patricia's increasingly frantic attempts to contact me lasted exactly 4 days. During that time, Streamline AI's phone lines were overwhelmed with interview requests, partnership proposals, and congratulatory messages from industry leaders across the globe. Rachel and I barely had time to process the magnitude of attention our Forbes feature had generated, let alone deal with personal family drama that felt insignificant compared to the professional opportunities suddenly available to us. David, meanwhile, was fielding his own barrage of calls from family members who had apparently missed the memo about his wife being an unsuitable match for their social circle. His uncle Michael called to congratulate him on marrying such a successful entrepreneur. His cousin Sarah wanted to know if I could speak at her company's next leadership conference. Even Amanda, who had been politely distant since our wedding, suddenly expressed interest in having lunch to discuss how Streamline AI might help optimize her husband's logistics consulting business. But it was David's father, Robert, who delivered the most revealing phone call that week. Robert called on Thursday evening while David and I were reviewing acquisition proposals that had arrived following the Forbes announcement. I could hear Robert's voice through the phone as he apologized profusely for missing what he now understood was the wedding of the decade between his son and a future billionaire. David's responses were measured but cold. He thanked his father for the congratulations, but made it clear that the family's sudden interest in his wife felt opportunistic rather than genuine. When Robert suggested that perhaps they had all misunderstood my potential and that mistakes had been made, David's voice carried an edge I had rarely heard before. "Dad, Jess hasn't changed. Her success isn't new information to anyone who is actually paying attention. The only thing that's different is that her achievements are now impossible for Mom to ignore or dismiss." David's words were precise and cutting. "She was building this company when you all chose to boycott our wedding. She was brilliant and driven and worthy of respect 18 months ago, just like she is today." Robert's response was quiet, and I could hear the shame in his voice even from across the room. He asked if there was any possibility of rebuilding bridges, of finding a way to welcome me into the family properly. David told him that those decisions weren't his to make alone. and that any reconciliation would require genuine acknowledgement of the harm that had been done, rather than excitement about potential benefits. After David hung up, we sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. I was processing the strange experience of watching people who had dismissed me suddenly scramble to associate themselves with my success. David seemed to be working through his own complex emotions about his family's behavior and their sudden change of heart. "How does it feel?" David asked eventually, "knowing that they're all desperate to get close to you now?" I considered the question carefully. The honest answer was complicated. Part of me felt vindicated by their obvious regret and panic. There was satisfaction in knowing that Patricia Martinez, who had treated me like an embarrassing inconvenience, was now leaving voicemails that bordered on begging. But mostly, I felt sad that it had taken public recognition of my financial success for David's family to consider treating me with basic respect. "It feels hollow," I told him. "If they had valued me as a person, my success would be something to celebrate together. Instead, it feels like they're mourning missed opportunities rather than celebrating genuine happiness for us." David reached across the couch and took my hand. "You know I never doubted you, right? Even when things got difficult with my family, I knew you were going to do something extraordinary. I just didn't anticipate how extraordinary it would be." I squeezed his hand, grateful once again for his unwavering support throughout the UPE and downs of both my business journey and the family conflicts. David had never wavered in his belief in my potential, even when his own family was actively undermining our relationship. His faith in me had been a constant source of strength during the challenging early days of Streamline AI. The next morning brought a development that shifted the entire dynamic of the situation. Patricia didn't call my phone. Instead, she showed up at Streamline AI's offices unannounced, asking the receptionist if she could speak with me about an urgent family matter. Our receptionist, Maria, called my office to let me know that David's mother was in the lobby requesting a meeting. I almost told Maria to inform Patricia that I was unavailable, but curiosity got the better of me. After 3 years of subtle hostility and 18 months of complete silence, what could Patricia possibly want to say that required an in-person conversation? I agreed to meet with her in our main conference room, partly because I wanted witnesses to whatever conversation was about to unfold. The conference room had glass walls that provided privacy for conversation while allowing my employees to see that the meeting was taking place. Given Patricia's history of manipulating situations to her advantage, I wanted transparency about whatever discussion we were about to have. Patricia entered the conference room looking more nervous than I had ever seen her. Her usual impeccable composure was replaced by obvious anxiety, and her hands trembled slightly as she set down her purse and declined my offer of coffee or water. She was dressed expensively as always, but her makeup couldn't quite conceal the stress lines around her eyes or the fact that she hadn't been sleeping well. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Jessica," she began, using my full name for the first time in our entire relationship. "I know this is unexpected, and I know I probably don't deserve your time given how I've behaved." I waited silently for her to continue. Patricia seemed to be struggling with how to begin the conversation she had apparently rehearsed. She looked around the conference room, taking in the modern furniture, the sophisticated technology displays, and the view of downtown Denver through floor-to-ceiling windows that made it clear Streamline AI was no longer the small startup she had dismissively called my little computer company. "I've made terrible mistakes," Patricia continued, her voice quieter than I was accustomed to hearing. "I let my own prejudices and fears cloud my judgment about you and about what kind of person you are. I was wrong about your potential, wrong about your character, and wrong about what you would bring to David's life." The apology felt rehearsed, but not insincere. Patricia seemed genuinely distressed about the situation, though I suspected her distress was motivated more by social embarrassment than by actual remorse about the harm she had caused. Still, hearing her acknowledge her mistakes was something I had never expected to experience. I know that missing your wedding was unforgivable, she went on. David hasn't spoken to me properly since then, and I've lost 18 months of getting to know my daughter-in-law because I was too stubborn and prideful to admit that I was wrong about you. I let her finish her prepared remarks before responding. Patricia had clearly thought through this conversation carefully, and I wanted to understand the full scope of what she was trying to accomplish before deciding how to react. She talked about her regret, her desire to build a relationship with me, and her hope that we could find a way to move forward as a family. When she finished speaking, I took a moment to consider my response. The professional side of my brain was analyzing Patricia's motivations and calculating the potential benefits and risks of different approaches to this conversation. The personal side was processing years of accumulated hurt and frustration at being treated as unworthy of basic respect by someone whose opinion mattered to my husband. Patricia, I said finally, I appreciate you coming here to apologize. I know that couldn't have been easy given your usual approach to admitting mistakes. She winced slightly at the subtle barb, but nodded for me to continue. But I have to ask, would you be here if Forbes hadn't published that article? If my company was still valued at $5 million instead of $180 million, would you have had this revelation about my character and potential? Patricia's pause before answering told me everything I needed to know. She eventually said that she had been reconsidering her behavior toward me for months, but the honesty of her initial reaction had already revealed the truth. This reconciliation attempt was motivated by social embarrassment and missed opportunities, rather than genuine recognition of wrongdoing. I think we both know the answer to that question, I continued. Which means this conversation isn't really about apologizing for past behavior. It's about positioning yourself to benefit from my current success while minimizing the social costs of having alienated me for the past 3 years. Patricia's composure cracked slightly. That's not fair, Jessica. Yes, seeing your success in the media made me realize how wrong I was about you, but that doesn't mean my regret isn't genuine. I leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. Let me tell you what would be genuine, Patricia. Acknowledging that you treated me poorly not because I lacked potential, but because you believed I lacked the right kind of background. Admitting that you would have treated any woman from my circumstances the same way, regardless of her character or accomplishments. Recognizing that your behavior was about protecting your social status rather than protecting your son's happiness. The color drained from Patricia's face as I spoke. She clearly hadn't anticipated such a direct confrontation about her motivations. Most of her social interactions probably involved polite deflection and face-saving compromises, rather than honest examination of underlying prejudices. You boycotted my wedding because you were embarrassed to introduce your friends to a daughter-in-law whose parents are farmers, I continued. You undermined my professional reputation at social events because you wanted people to see me as David's hobby rather than as his equal. You excluded me from family gatherings because my presence reminded everyone that your son had chosen love over social advancement. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, though whether from shame or frustration I couldn't tell. You're right, she whispered. All of that is true. I was a snob and a social climber who cared more about appearances than about David's happiness. But I want to do better. I want to be better. Her admission was more honest than I had expected, and it took some of the wind out of my confrontational approach. Patricia Martinez acknowledging her own snobbery and social climbing was not something I had anticipated hearing, even under these circumstances. What does doing better look like to you, Patricia? I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. She wiped her eyes carefully, trying to preserve her makeup. I want to get to know you as a person, rather than as a social inconvenience. I want to understand your business and support your success. I want to be the kind of mother-in-law who adds value to your life rather than creating stress and conflict. I studied her face, trying to determine how much of this sentiment was genuine versus performative. Patricia had spent 3 years demonstrating that she was capable of sophisticated manipulation and strategic relationship management. Trusting her motivations now would require ignoring substantial evidence about her character and priorities. And what about the next time David falls in love with someone you don't immediately approve of? I asked. What about when your other children make choices that don't align with your social aspirations? Have you actually changed your underlying values? Or have you just learned to be more careful about opposing people who might become inconveniently successful? The question seemed to catch Patricia off guard. She had clearly prepared for a conversation about rebuilding our specific relationship, but hadn't anticipated being asked to examine whether her fundamental approach to social relationships had actually changed. "I don't know," she said after a long pause. "I'd like to think that this experience has taught me not to judge people based on their backgrounds, but I honestly don't know if I've changed that much or if I've just learned to be more cautious about my assumptions." Her honesty was surprising and somewhat disarming. I had expected Patricia to insist that she had experienced a complete transformation in her worldview, which would have made it easy to dismiss her reconciliation attempt as purely strategic. Her admission that she might not have fundamentally changed was more compelling than false promises about becoming a completely different person. "At least you're being honest about that," I said. "Most people in your situation would promise that they've seen the light and learned to value character over social status." Patricia managed a weak smile. "I've learned that making promises I might not be able to keep is worse than admitting uncertainty about my own capacity for change." We sat in silence for several minutes while I processed the conversation. Patricia seemed to be waiting for me to indicate whether her apology and admission of fault was sufficient to begin rebuilding some kind of relationship. I was trying to determine whether there was any benefit to engaging with her attempts at reconciliation or whether protecting my own peace of mind required maintaining distance. "Here's what I'm willing to offer," I said eventually. "I'll have dinner with you and Robert, along with David, to discuss how we might be able to coexist as family members. But I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, and rebuilding trust is going to require consistent demonstration of changed behavior over time." Patricia nodded eagerly. "That's more than I deserve after how I've treated you. Thank you for being willing to try." I held up a hand to indicate I wasn't finished. "But I also need you to understand that my success doesn't change who I was or who I am. I'm the same person who deserved basic respect 3 years ago when David first brought me to your house. I'm the same person who deserved to have her wedding attended by her husband's parents. The only thing that's different is that my achievements are now impossible for you to ignore." Patricia's nod was more subdued this time. "I understand. And I'm ashamed that it took public recognition of your success for me to acknowledge what should have been obvious from the beginning." After Patricia left, I sat alone in the conference room for 20 minutes, trying to process the conversation and my own mixed feelings about her apology. Part of me was satisfied that she had finally been forced to confront her own prejudices and acknowledge the harm she had caused. But another part of me was frustrated that it had taken such dramatic circumstances to generate even this limited recognition of wrongdoing. Rachel found me there when she returned from a client meeting. She took one look at my expression and immediately asked what had happened. I filled her in on Patricia's visit and her attempts at reconciliation, including my agreement to have dinner with David's parents. "How do you feel about it?" Rachel asked when I finished explaining the conversation. "Conflicted," I admitted. She finally acknowledged everything I wanted her to acknowledge about her behavior and her motivations. But it feels hollow, because she only did it after my success became too obvious to ignore. Rachel settled into the chair across from me. "Do you think she's genuinely sorry or just sorry that she bet against you?" I considered the question. Probably both. I think she's genuinely upset about the social embarrassment and the damage to her relationship with David. Whether she's genuinely sorry about treating me poorly is harder to determine. Does it matter? Rachel asked. I mean, do you need her to have perfect motivations in order to benefit from improved family relationships? It was a fair question. My relationship with David would certainly be easier if the tension with his family could be reduced, even if that reduction was motivated by self-interest rather than genuine change of heart. And refusing to engage with Patricia's reconciliation, attempts might create additional stress for David, who was already struggling with the family conflict. I think I need to try, I said finally. Not because I trust her motivations, but because maintaining this level of family conflict isn't sustainable in the long term. David shouldn't have to choose between his wife and his parents indefinitely. Rachel nodded. Just be careful not to let your guard down too quickly. People who are motivated by social status and financial success don't usually change their fundamental values overnight. Her warning proved prescient when Patricia called me that evening to arrange the family dinner. Her tone was enthusiastic and grateful, but she immediately began suggesting restaurants and discussing guest lists in a way that made it clear she viewed our reconciliation as a social opportunity rather than a private family matter. I was thinking Mizuna or Fruition would be perfect for our dinner, Patricia said, naming two of Denver's most exclusive restaurants, somewhere elegant enough to reflect the importance of the occasion. And perhaps we could invite Robert's business partner and his wife, since they've been asking about you since the Forbes article came out. I interrupted her planning. Patricia, this isn't a social event or a networking opportunity. It's a private family conversation about rebuilding relationships. We should have dinner at your house or ours, with just the four of us. There was a pause before Patricia responded. Of course, you're absolutely right. I got carried away thinking about celebrating your success. A quiet family dinner is much more appropriate. But her initial instinct to turn our reconciliation into a public display told me everything I needed to know about her underlying motivations. Patricia Martinez was still primarily concerned with social appearances and the benefits she might derive from association with my success. Her apology had been genuine to the extent that she genuinely regretted missing opportunities, but her fundamental approach to relationships remained transactional. The family dinner took place the following Sunday at David's childhood home in Cherry Hills Village. Patricia had prepared an elaborate meal that felt more like entertainment for important guests than a simple family gathering. The dining room was set with her finest china and crystal. Flowers were arranged throughout the house, and she had clearly spent considerable time and money creating an atmosphere of celebration rather than reconciliation. Robert greeted me with obvious warmth and enthusiasm, apologizing repeatedly for missing our wedding and expressing genuine excitement about Streamline AI's success. His regret seemed more authentic than Patricia's, possibly because his initial reservations about me had been less pronounced and more easily overcome by evidence of my professional achievements. Throughout dinner, Patricia made obvious efforts to demonstrate her newfound respect for my background and accomplishments. She asked detailed questions about my parents' farm, expressed interest in visiting Cedar Falls to meet my extended family, and solicited my opinions on everything from technology trends to business strategy. Her attention felt performative, but not entirely insincere. David watched these interactions carefully, clearly pleased that his parents were finally treating me with appropriate respect, but wary of the sudden transformation in their attitudes. He had lived with his mother's subtle manipulations long enough to recognize when her behavior was calculated rather than spontaneous. The most telling moment came when Patricia began discussing plans for hosting a party to introduce me properly to their social circle. She had apparently compiled a guest list of prominent Denver couples who would be interested in meeting a successful young entrepreneur, and she wanted to plan an elaborate cocktail reception that would establish my place within their community. Mom, David interrupted, I don't think Jess is interested in being introduced to your friends as a curiosity or a trophy. She's already well established in Denver's business community. Patricia looked confused by his objection. I just thought it would be nice for people to get to know her in a social context, rather than just reading about her in magazines. I decided to address her suggestion directly. Patricia, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not interested in being showcased to prove that you're not embarrassed by your daughter-in-law anymore. If you want to rebuild our relationship, it needs to be about genuine family connection rather than social networking opportunities. The remainder of the dinner passed more quietly, with conversation focusing on safer topics like David's work and travel plans rather than Patricia's ideas for reintroducing me to Denver society. By the time we left, it was clear that while Patricia was willing to acknowledge her past mistakes, she hadn't fundamentally changed her approach to relationships and social status. Over the following weeks, Patricia made consistent efforts to maintain contact and demonstrate her changed attitude toward me. She called regularly to ask about my work, sent congratulatory flowers when Streamline AI announced a new partnership, and included me in family communications that had previously excluded me. Her efforts were obvious and somewhat awkward, but they represented a significant change from her previous behavior. The real test of Patricia's transformation came when Denver Business Journal announced that they were featuring me on their cover as Entrepreneur of the Year. The article would include interviews with family members and close friends, and the journalist specifically requested to speak with David's parents about their perspective on my success and their relationship with me. Patricia called me immediately, after receiving the interview request, clearly excited about the opportunity to be quoted in a major business publication. She wanted to know what topics the journalist planned to cover, and how she should position her comments to be most supportive of my reputation and business interests. Her enthusiasm about participating in the article confirmed my suspicions about her motivations. Patricia Martinez, who had been too embarrassed to attend her son's wedding to a farm girl from Iowa, was now eager to be publicly associated with a successful entrepreneur who happened to be that same farm girl. The irony was too obvious to ignore. "Patricia," I said during our phone conversation, "I need to ask you directly. Are you excited about this interview because you're proud of my accomplishments, or because being quoted in a business magazine enhances your own social status?" There was a long silence before she answered. "Can't it be both? I am proud of what you've achieved, Jessica. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't also pleased that my friends will see that David married someone extraordinary." Her honesty was uncomfortable but refreshing. At least Patricia was admitting that her support for me was partially motivated by self-interest rather than pretending that she had experienced a complete moral transformation. Her acknowledgement of mixed motivations was more trustworthy than false claims about pure intentions. I agreed to let her participate in the interview, with the understanding that any comments she made would need to be honest about our relationship history, rather than creating a fictional narrative of consistent family support. The journalist had already researched our background and knew about the wedding boycott, so attempts to whitewash the past would only damage Patricia's credibility. The interview process proved illuminating for everyone involved. Patricia struggled to explain her initial reservations about me without sounding prejudiced or shallow, while still acknowledging that she had been wrong about my potential. Robert was more straightforward about his regrets and his current admiration for my achievements. David provided context about the family conflicts and his own frustration with his parents' behavior. When the article was published 2 months later, Patricia's quotes were diplomatic but honest about the mistakes she had made. She acknowledged that she had initially underestimated me due to class prejudices and admitted that missing our wedding was one of her greatest regrets. The article portrayed her as someone who had learned from her errors rather than someone who had never made them. The publication of the Entrepreneur of the Year feature marked a turning point in my relationship with David's family, though not necessarily for the reasons Patricia had hoped. Instead of elevating her social status through association with my success, the article's honest portrayal of our relationship history made it clear to everyone in their social circle that Patricia had initially rejected and dismissed me. Several people in Patricia's social network privately contacted David to express their surprise that his mother had been so resistant to accepting such an obviously accomplished daughter-in-law. The social embarrassment Patricia had hoped to avoid by boycotting our wedding ultimately came to pass anyway, just delayed by 18 months and amplified by the public recognition of her poor judgment. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Patricia Martinez had spent 3 years trying to protect her social reputation by distancing herself from her son's unsuitable wife, only to discover that her unsuitable daughter-in-law was actually a business prodigy whose success would make Patricia's rejection of her look foolish in retrospect. But perhaps the most significant development was David's growing understanding of his mother's character and motivations. Watching Patricia's transformation, from hostility to enthusiasm as my public profile grew, had opened his eyes to the transactional nature of many of her relationships. He began questioning other aspects of his family's social dynamics and their treatment of people outside their established circle. The experience had changed all of us in different ways. Patricia had been forced to confront her own prejudices and the limitations of her social climbing approach to relationships. David had gained insight into his family's character that would influence his future interactions with them. And I had learned that forgiveness didn't require forgetting, and that protecting my own dignity was more important than maintaining false harmony with people who had treated me poorly. As Streamline AI continued its rapid growth and expansion, the family dynamics settled into a new equilibrium that was more honest, if not entirely comfortable, for everyone involved. Patricia maintained her efforts to demonstrate respect and support for my work, though her motivations remained transparently mixed. Robert embraced his role as the supportive father-in-law with genuine enthusiasm that seemed less calculated than his wife's approach. The foundation had been laid for a functional, if not warm, relationship between David's family and me. Whether that foundation would prove strong enough to support genuine reconciliation remained to be seen, but at least the pretense and hostility that had characterized our early interactions had been replaced by honest acknowledgement of past mistakes and mutual self-interest in maintaining family peace. The most important lesson I learned during this period was that some relationships are improved by success. Not because success changes who you are, but because it forces other people to confront their own biases and assumptions about who deserves respect and recognition. Patricia Martinez had always been capable of treating me well. She had simply chosen not to do so until the social costs of her hostility became too high to ignore. The transformation in how Denver's elite social circle treated me following the Entrepreneur of the Year article was both swift and revealing. Invitations to charity galas, board positions, and exclusive networking events flooded my inbox from organizations that had never shown interest in my participation before. The same people who had politely ignored me at Patricia's social functions were now eager to claim association with my rising profile in the business community. What struck me most about this sudden social acceptance was how little effort anyone made to disguise their opportunistic motivations. Event organizers who contacted me explicitly mentioned the publicity value of having a Forbes-featured entrepreneur at their fundraisers. Board recruitment calls focused on the credibility my business success would bring to their organizations rather than any particular expertise I might offer in their specific areas of focus. Rachel found the whole situation amusing and suggested we create a standard response for declining invitations that came with obvious strings attached. We developed a polite but firm template that thanked people for their interest while making it clear that I was selective about my community involvement, based on genuine alignment with causes I cared about, rather than mutual publicity benefits. The most persistent requests came from women's business organizations and entrepreneurship support groups that wanted me to serve as a keynote speaker or board member. These invitations felt more legitimate since they aligned with my actual expertise and interests. But even they often came with undertones suggesting that my primary value was as a success story, rather than as a contributor of substantive knowledge or leadership. I accepted speaking engagements selectively, focusing on events where I could provide genuine value to other entrepreneurs, rather than simply serving as inspiration porn for established business leaders who wanted to feel good about supporting innovation. The distinction was important to me because I remembered how isolating it had felt to be dismissed as inexperienced or naive during Streamline AI's early development phase. One speaking engagement that proved particularly meaningful was at the University of Colorado's Business School, where I had the opportunity to address students who reminded me of myself just a few years earlier. Many of them came from backgrounds similar to mine, working multiple jobs to afford tuition while pursuing degrees that they hoped would open doors to opportunities their families had never imagined. During the question and answer session following my presentation, a young woman asked how I had maintained confidence in my vision when everyone around me seemed skeptical about my chances for success. The question brought back vivid memories of those early investor meetings where I had been dismissed as too young, too inexperienced, or too ambitious for my own good. I told her about the importance of building a support network of people who believed in potential rather than just proven track records, and about the value of focusing on customer feedback and market validation rather than seeking approval from gatekeepers who might not understand innovative approaches to established problems. But mostly, I emphasized that persistence and adaptability were more valuable than any particular background or set of initial advantages. After the event, several students approached me with questions about internship opportunities at Streamline AI or advice about their own business ideas. Their enthusiasm and hunger for learning reminded me why I had been drawn to entrepreneurship in the first place, and I left the university feeling more energized about my work than I had in months. The experience also clarified something important about my own values and priorities. While the social recognition and financial success of Streamline AI had been gratifying, what actually motivated me was the opportunity to solve complex problems and create value for customers rather than simply accumulating wealth or status. The external validation was nice, but it wasn't what drove me to work late nights perfecting our algorithms or what excited me about potential new markets for our services. This realization became relevant when Patricia began pushing more aggressively for me to take advantage of my newfound prominence in Denver's social hierarchy. She had apparently compiled a list of influential couples who were interested in getting to know me, along with detailed background information about their business, interests, and potential opportunities for mutual benefit. Patricia's approach to networking was systematic and strategic in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of how she had originally tried to manage my integration into the Martinez family social circle. She had researched everyone's interests, identified potential conversation topics, and developed talking points that would position me advantageously within their community dynamics. When she presented her networking strategy to me over lunch at one of Denver's most exclusive private clubs, I realized that Patricia still fundamentally misunderstood what motivated me and what I wanted from my relationships with other people. She was approaching my social integration like a business development project, rather than recognizing that I might have different priorities than maximizing my influence within her particular community. "Patricia," I said, interrupting her detailed explanation of why I should cultivate a relationship with the wife of a prominent real estate developer, "I appreciate the thought you've put into this, but I'm not interested in strategic relationship building for its own sake. If I'm going to spend time with people, it needs to be because we have genuine common interests or because there's mutual value beyond social positioning." She looked confused by my response. "But Jessica, these connections could be incredibly valuable for Streamline AI's growth and for your personal influence in the community. Why wouldn't you want to take advantage of your current momentum to build lasting relationships with influential people?" Her question revealed the fundamental difference in how we approached social interactions. Patricia viewed relationships as investments that should be cultivated based on potential returns, while I preferred connections that developed organically around shared interests or values. The idea of spending time with people primarily because they were influential or well-connected felt exhausting and inauthentic to me. I tried to explain my perspective without being dismissive of her efforts to help me navigate Denver's social landscape. "I understand the strategic value of building a strong professional network, but I'd rather focus on relationships with people who share my interests in technology, entrepreneurship, or social impact, rather than just people who happen to be successful in whatever field. Patricia's expression suggested that she found my approach naive and potentially limiting. But Jessica, you never know where opportunities might come from. The woman I mentioned has connections throughout the hospitality industry that could be valuable for Streamline AI's expansion plans. Dismissing potential relationships because they don't immediately appeal to you personally might mean missing important business opportunities. Her point had some merit, but it also reflected a transactional approach to human connection that I found fundamentally unappealing. I had seen how Patricia's strategic relationship management had played out in her treatment of me, and I didn't want to become someone who evaluated other people primarily based on their potential utility for my own goals. The conversation ended with polite disagreement about networking philosophy, but it highlighted an ongoing tension in my relationship with David's family. Patricia wanted me to leverage my success to advance within established social hierarchies, while I was more interested in using my platform to support other entrepreneurs and contribute to causes I cared about rather than simply accumulating influence for its own sake. This philosophical difference became more pronounced when I was invited to join the board of directors for Denver's Children's Hospital Foundation. The invitation came through Dr. Sarah Mitchell, whom I had met through my university speaking engagements rather than through Patricia's social networking efforts. Dr. Mitchell was impressed by my background in logistics optimization and believed that my expertise could help the foundation improve their operational efficiency and expand their impact. The board position appealed to me because it represented an opportunity to contribute substantively to an organization whose mission I genuinely supported, rather than simply serving as a prestigious name on a letterhead. The foundation was struggling with supply chain challenges that directly aligned with Streamline AI's core competencies, and I could see clear ways that my business experience could create real value for their operations. When I mentioned the board invitation to Patricia, her immediate response was to research the social prominence of other board members and the networking opportunities the position might provide. She was excited about the prestige associated with the appointment and the access it would give me to other influential philanthropists in the Denver area. Her enthusiasm about the networking aspects of the board position reinforced my sense that we had fundamentally different motivations for community involvement. Patricia saw the appointment as validation of my social status and as a stepping stone to additional influential positions, while I was primarily interested in the opportunity to apply my skills to support an important cause. I accepted the board position and threw myself into understanding the foundation's operational challenges with the same intensity I had brought to developing Streamline AI's technology platform. The foundation's logistics were indeed inefficient, with supply chain bottlenecks that were increasing costs and limiting their ability to serve patients effectively. Working with the foundation's staff, I developed a comprehensive analysis of their procurement, inventory management, and distribution processes. The recommendations I presented to the board included both immediate improvements that could be implemented quickly and longer-term strategic changes that would require more significant investment, but could dramatically improve their operational effectiveness. The board was impressed by the thoroughness of my analysis and the potential impact of my recommendations. More importantly, the foundation's executive director was enthusiastic about implementing changes that could free up resources to expand their patient services rather than simply maintaining existing operations more efficiently. The project reminded me why I had been drawn to logistics optimization in the first place. The abstract challenge of improving complex systems became meaningful when those improvements translated into better outcomes for people who needed support. Working with the foundation felt more fulfilling than any of the networking events Patricia had encouraged me to attend. My involvement with the Children's Hospital Foundation also introduced me to other board members who shared my interest in using business skills to support social causes. Unlike the strategic relationship building Patricia had advocated, these connections developed naturally around shared work and common values, rather than calculated networking objectives. One board member who became a genuine friend was Dr. Michael Chen, a pediatric surgeon who had started a nonprofit organization focused on improving healthcare access in rural communities. His background in addressing complex systemic problems, from a practical rather than theoretical perspective, resonated with my own approach to business challenges. Dr. Chen introduced me to other professionals who were working at the intersection of technology and social impact, expanding my understanding of how Streamline AI's platform might be adapted to serve organizations with missions beyond profit maximization. These conversations sparked ideas about potential pro bono applications of our technology that could create significant social value, while also demonstrating our capabilities to new market segments. The contrast between these organically developed professional relationships and Patricia's strategic networking agenda became a source of ongoing tension in our family dynamics. David found himself caught between his mother's desire for me to embrace traditional social advancement opportunities and my preference for community involvement that aligned with my personal values and professional interests. The situation came to a head when Patricia arranged for me to meet Margaret Wellington, the wife of one of Denver's most prominent investment bankers, and a fixture in the city's charity circuit. Patricia had orchestrated the introduction without consulting me, scheduling what she described as a casual coffee meeting that would give Margaret and me an opportunity to get acquainted. Margaret Wellington represented everything about Denver's established social hierarchy that I found off-putting. She was perfectly polite and obviously intelligent, but her conversation focused entirely on social positioning, mutual acquaintances, and opportunities for strategic collaboration that would benefit both of our reputations within the community. Throughout our coffee meeting, Margaret evaluated me with the same calculating attention that I imagined she brought to selecting art for her home or choosing venues for her charity events. She was clearly trying to determine whether associating with me would enhance or diminish her own social standing, and whether I understood the unspoken rules of conduct within their social circle. The conversation felt like an audition for membership in an exclusive club whose benefits were unclear, and whose membership requirements seemed to involve suppressing authentic personality traits in favor of strategic social performance. By the time we finished our coffee, I was exhausted by the effort required to maintain polite engagement with someone whose primary interest in me seemed to be my potential utility for her own social agenda. When Patricia called that evening to ask how my meeting with Margaret had gone, I was direct about my lack of interest in pursuing a friendship that felt purely transactional. Patricia was disappointed by my response and frustrated by what she saw as my failure to appreciate valuable social opportunities. "Jessica, Margaret Wellington can open doors for you throughout this city," Patricia said, her voice carrying the same tone she had used when lecturing David about social responsibilities during our early relationship. "She's connected to everyone who matters in Denver's business and philanthropic communities. Dismissing her friendship because you don't immediately click personally is short-sighted." I tried to explain that my objection wasn't to Margaret personally, but to the transactional nature of the relationship Patricia was trying to facilitate. "I'm not dismissing anyone's friendship, Patricia. I'm just not interested in relationships that are primarily about mutual social advancement rather than genuine connection or shared interests." Patricia's frustration was evident in her response. "But that's how networking works, Jessica. Professional relationships often begin with strategic considerations and develop into genuine friendships over time. You're limiting your opportunities by expecting every interaction to feel immediately authentic." Her point had some validity, but it also reflected a fundamental difference in how we approached social relationships. Patricia was comfortable with relationships that began strategically and might eventually become genuine, while I preferred connections that started with authentic common ground and might eventually provide strategic benefits as a secondary consideration. The disagreement highlighted broader tensions about my integration into David's family and social circle. Patricia wanted me to embrace traditional approaches to social advancement that would position me within existing hierarchies, while I was more interested in building my own network around shared values and interests rather than inherited social structures. David found himself mediating these philosophical differences more frequently as my public profile continued to grow, and Patricia's social ambitions for me became more elaborate. He understood both perspectives, but was growing tired of constantly navigating between his mother's strategic thinking and my preference for authentic relationship building. The situation became more complicated when Streamline AI announced our plans to go public within the following year. The initial public offering would significantly increase my personal wealth and public visibility, potentially moving me from successful entrepreneur to genuinely wealthy business leader. Patricia's excitement about these developments was palpable and somewhat concerning. She began researching the social implications of substantial wealth and started planning for what she saw as my inevitable elevation to the highest levels of Denver's social hierarchy. Her enthusiasm about my potential future influence was flattering, in some ways, but also reinforcing my concerns about her motivations for supporting our reconciliation. When Forbes estimated that my personal net worth would likely exceed $500 million following the IPO, Patricia's behavior became noticeably more deferential and accommodating. She stopped pushing her networking agenda quite as aggressively and became more supportive of my charitable work and board commitments. Perhaps recognizing that someone with my projected wealth would have considerable influence regardless of whether I embraced traditional social advancement strategies. The change in Patricia's approach was subtle but unmistakable. She began soliciting my opinions on social and business matters with more genuine interest and less obvious calculation. Her attempts to facilitate strategic relationships became suggestions rather than pressure, and she showed more respect for my preferences about community involvement and professional priorities. David noticed the change in his mother's behavior and commented on it during one of our evening walks through our neighborhood. "She's treating you differently now that the IPO announcement made your wealth projections public," he observed. "More like an equal rather than someone she needs to manage or direct." His observation was accurate and somewhat depressing. Patricia Martinez had apparently needed proof that I would become genuinely wealthy before she could treat me with the respect she showed to other successful people in her social circle. The fact that my projected net worth mattered more to her than my demonstrated business acumen or personal character was disappointing but not entirely surprising given our history. The experience reinforced my determination to maintain clear boundaries about my community involvement and social relationships, regardless of how my financial situation might change. I had worked too hard to build a company based on genuine value creation to allow wealth to transform me into someone who evaluated relationships primarily through transactional lenses. As Streamline AI moved closer to our IPO date, I found myself reflecting on the journey from that first awkward family dinner in Cherry Hills Village to the complex but functional relationship I now had with David's parents. Patricia's transformation from hostile rejection to enthusiastic support had been revealing about her character and motivations, but it had also taught me important lessons about maintaining authentic relationships in the face of changing circumstances. The most valuable insight was recognizing that some people would always evaluate my worth based on external measures of success rather than personal character or genuine compatibility. Patricia's eventual acceptance of me was gratifying in some ways, but it was also limited by the fact that it was contingent on my continued success rather than rooted in appreciation for who I was as a person. Understanding this dynamic helped me maintain appropriate expectations for our relationship going forward. Patricia and I would probably never be close in the way that I was close with my own mother or with Rachel, but we could maintain respectful family relationships based on mutual self-interest and shared commitment to David's happiness. The key was recognizing that Patricia's conditional acceptance was still preferable to ongoing family conflict, as long as I didn't mistake strategic politeness for genuine affection, or allow her social ambitions to influence my own decisions about community, involvement, and professional priorities. As I prepared for the responsibilities and opportunities that would come with the IPO, I felt confident that the lessons learned through navigating Patricia's transformation would serve me well in other relationships that might be influenced by changing perceptions of my wealth and influence. The experience had taught me to value authentic connections while managing transactional relationships diplomatically when necessary for family harmony or professional effectiveness. Most importantly, it had reinforced my commitment to using whatever platform and resources I gained through Streamline AI's success to support causes and people I genuinely cared about, rather than simply accumulating influence within existing social hierarchies. Patricia's approach to relationship building had its merits, but it wasn't compatible with my own values or long-term goals for making a meaningful impact through my work and community involvement. The months leading up to Streamline AI's initial public offering were a whirlwind of legal preparations, financial audits, and media interviews that consumed nearly every waking hour of my life. Rachel and I found ourselves working with investment bankers, securities lawyers, and public relations specialists who helped transform our scrappy startup into a company ready for public ownership and the scrutiny that came with it. The process was both exhilarating and exhausting. Every aspect of our business operations, financial history, and future projections was examined in microscopic detail by teams of analysts and auditors who would ultimately determine whether public investors should trust us with their money. The responsibility felt enormous, and I often found myself lying awake at night thinking about the thousands of people who would soon own pieces of the company Rachel and I had built from nothing. David proved invaluable during this period, handling many of the domestic responsibilities that I simply didn't have time for, while also serving as my emotional anchor during particularly stressful moments. His marketing background helped him understand the public relations aspects of going public, and he provided thoughtful feedback on my media interviews and public statements about Streamline AI's future direction. The IPO roadshow took us to major financial centers across the country, where we presented our business model and growth projections to institutional investors who would ultimately determine the success of our public offering. These presentations were unlike anything I had experienced before, requiring me to articulate not just what Streamline AI did, but why our approach to logistics optimization represented a fundamental shift in how businesses would manage their supply chains in the future. The audiences were sophisticated and skeptical, asking probing questions about our competitive advantages, market penetration strategies, and ability to maintain growth rates as we scaled beyond our current size. Many of the questions came from investors who had seen dozens of promising technology companies fail to deliver on ambitious promises, and their skepticism kept me sharp and focused on demonstrating concrete value rather than relying on abstract potential. One presentation that stood out was at a prominent investment firm in New York, where the managing partner asked directly whether I believed Streamline AI could maintain its innovative edge as we transitioned from a founder-led startup to a publicly traded corporation with fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders. The question forced me to articulate my vision for preserving our entrepreneurial culture while meeting the demands of public ownership. I explained that our competitive advantage wasn't just our current technology, but our approach to continuous innovation and our deep understanding of logistics challenges across different industries. The algorithms that had launched Streamline AI were constantly evolving based on real-world implementation feedback, and our team's expertise in both technology development and practical supply chain management would allow us to stay ahead of competitors who might copy our current solutions but struggle to match our pace of improvement. The investor seemed satisfied with my response, but the exchange reminded me that going public would fundamentally change how I thought about Streamline AI's future. Instead of answering only to customers and employees, I would now be accountable to thousands of shareholders who expected consistent growth and profitability, regardless of market conditions or technological disruptions. Back in Denver, Patricia's behavior during the IPO process revealed both the extent of her transformation and the limitations of that change. She was genuinely proud of my accomplishments and supportive of the stress I was experiencing, but she was also clearly calculating the social implications of my impending wealth and the opportunities it might create for enhanced family status. within Denver's elite circles. Her support manifested in practical ways that I appreciated. She organized family dinners around my travel schedule, ensured that David had emotional support during my frequent absences, and even volunteered to handle some of the social obligations that I was too busy to manage personally. But she also began dropping hints about charitable organizations and social events that would benefit from my participation once the IPO dust settled. The most revealing conversation occurred when Patricia suggested that I might want to consider purchasing a larger home in a more prestigious neighborhood once my net worth increased substantially. She had apparently researched properties in areas like Hilltop and Country Club that would better reflect my new financial status and provide appropriate settings for the kind of entertaining she assumed I would want to do. Her suggestion wasn't entirely unreasonable, as our current home was indeed becoming inadequate for the level of business entertainment that might be expected of a public company CEO. But Patricia's focus on social positioning, rather than practical considerations, reminded me that her understanding of my priorities remained somewhat superficial, despite her efforts to be more supportive. I told her that any decisions about housing would be based on our actual needs rather than social expectations, and that I was more interested in finding ways to use increased resources for philanthropic purposes than for lifestyle inflation that served primarily to impress other people. Patricia accepted my response graciously, but I could see that she found my priorities somewhat puzzling given the opportunities that substantial wealth could provide for social advancement. The IPO launch exceeded everyone's most optimistic projections. Streamline AI's stock opened at $42 per share and closed the first day of trading at $68, valuing the company at nearly $800 million, and making both Rachel and me substantially wealthier than we had ever imagined possible. The financial press covered our success extensively, with several articles focusing on our backgrounds as women entrepreneurs who had built a major technology company without traditional venture capital backing in the early stages. The media. Attention was intense and somewhat overwhelming. Reporters wanted to know everything about our personal histories, business philosophies, and plans for using our newfound wealth. I tried to keep the focus on Streamline AI's technology and market potential, rather than turning myself into a personality-driven story. But the business press seemed particularly interested in the narrative of young entrepreneurs achieving dramatic success through innovation and persistence. One interview that generated significant coverage was with Fortune magazine, where I discussed the importance of maintaining company culture and innovation focus, despite the pressures of public ownership. The article portrayed me as thoughtfully navigating the transition from startup founder to public company leader while staying true to the values that had driven Streamline AI's initial success. Patricia was thrilled by the Fortune feature and the positive coverage of my business acumen and personal character. She forwarded the article to everyone in her social network and made sure copies were available at her real estate office for clients and colleagues to read. Her pride in my accomplishments felt genuine, though it was clearly also tied to the reflected prestige she gained from being associated with my success. The reaction from Denver's business and social communities was swift and dramatic. Invitations flooded in from organizations wanting me to serve on boards, speak at events, or simply attend social functions where my presence would enhance their own credibility and appeal. The attention was flattering, but also exhausting, requiring careful evaluation of which opportunities aligned with my interests and values versus which were primarily about social networking or mutual publicity. I developed a systematic approach to evaluating requests for my time and involvement. Opportunities that allowed me to contribute substantive expertise to causes I cared about received priority, while purely social or ceremonial invitations were politely declined. The Children's Hospital Foundation board work had shown me how much more fulfilling it was to apply my skills to meaningful problems, rather than simply lending my name to organizations for prestige purposes. One invitation that required careful consideration came from the Denver Art Museum, which wanted me to join their board of trustees. The position would involve significant financial contributions, as well as active participation in fundraising. efforts and strategic planning for the museum's future development. While I appreciated the arts and understood their importance to community vitality, I didn't have particular expertise in museum management or art curation that would make my contributions especially valuable. After extensive discussion with David and Rachel, I decided to decline the museum board position in favor of focusing my limited volunteer time on organizations where I could provide unique value, rather than simply prestigious names and financial resources. The decision disappointed some people who had facilitated the invitation, but it felt consistent with my commitment to authentic engagement rather than token participation in high-profile organizations. The choice to be selective about board commitments and social obligations created some tension with Patricia, who viewed my declining of prestigious invitations as missing opportunities to solidify my position within Denver's established elite. She argued that serving on prominent cultural and charitable boards was expected of people with my level of wealth, and that declining such invitations might be interpreted as snobbery or antisocial behavior. Her perspective reflected a fundamental difference in how we viewed social responsibility and community engagement. Patricia believed that wealth created obligations to participate in established philanthropic and cultural institutions regardless of personal interest or expertise, while I preferred to focus my efforts on areas where I could make meaningful contributions rather than simply fulfilling social expectations. The disagreement came to a head when I was invited to co-chair a major fundraising gala for one of Denver's most prestigious cultural organizations. The position would involve months of planning, significant personal financial contributions, and extensive networking with wealthy donors throughout the region. Patricia was thrilled by the invitation and couldn't understand why I would consider declining such a clear validation of my social status. I explained that while I respected the organization's mission, I didn't have particular passion for their work or expertise that would make my leadership especially valuable. The time commitment would also interfere with Streamline AI's expansion plans and my existing charitable commitments, making it difficult to provide the level of engagement that the position deserved. Patricia's response revealed the depth of her concern about my social positioning. Jessica, this isn't just about whether you're personally passionate about the cause. It's about establishing yourself as a serious philanthropic leader in this community. People judge you based on the organizations you support and the roles you accept. Declining this kind of invitation sends the wrong message about your priorities and your commitment to Denver. Her argument had some merit, but it also represented exactly the kind of transactional thinking about charitable work that I wanted to avoid. The idea of accepting philanthropic leadership roles primarily to send social messages rather than to contribute meaningfully to causes I cared about felt dishonest and potentially counterproductive for the organizations involved. I ultimately declined the gala co-chair position, recommending several other prominent business leaders who had deeper connections to the cultural sector and more relevant experience in large-scale fundraising. My decision was accepted graciously by the organization, but Patricia remained concerned about the long-term implications for my reputation within Denver's philanthropic community. The tension over charitable and social commitments reflected broader challenges in my relationship with David's family as my public profile and financial resources continued to grow. Patricia wanted me to embrace traditional expectations for wealthy philanthropists and social leaders, while I was more interested in finding innovative ways to use my resources and platform to support entrepreneurship, education, and economic opportunity for people from backgrounds similar to my own. These philosophical differences became more pronounced when I announced plans to establish a foundation focused on supporting rural entrepreneurs and small businesses in agricultural communities. The foundation would provide both financial resources and business expertise to help rural entrepreneurs overcome the structural disadvantages they faced in accessing capital, markets, and professional networks. Patricia was supportive of my philanthropic goals but puzzled by my focus on rural development, rather than more traditional charitable causes. She questioned whether supporting small businesses in agricultural communities would provide the same social recognition and impact as contributing to established cultural or educational institutions in major metropolitan areas. Her reaction highlighted a fundamental misunderstanding of my motivations for philanthropic work. Patricia viewed charitable giving primarily as a social responsibility that came with wealth and status, while I saw it as an opportunity to address systemic problems that had affected my own family and community. Supporting rural entrepreneurs wasn't about gaining social recognition. It was about creating opportunities for people who reminded me of my younger self. The foundation planning process became a source of both personal fulfillment and family tension. I worked with lawyers and philanthropic advisors to develop a structure that would maximize impact while ensuring sustainable operations over time. The foundation would focus on providing seed funding, mentorship, and business development support to entrepreneurs in rural communities who had limited access to traditional venture capital or professional networks. David was enthusiastic about the foundation's mission and volunteered to help with marketing and communications aspects of our work. His background in business development proved valuable as we designed programs that would effectively reach rural entrepreneurs and provide support that addressed their specific challenges rather than simply replicating urban-focused business. Assistance programs. Rachel also became involved in the foundation planning, bringing her expertise in operations and strategic planning to help design systems that would efficiently evaluate potential recipients and measure the impact of our support. Her involvement strengthened our partnership beyond Streamline AI and gave us a shared philanthropic mission that extended our collaboration into new areas. The foundation launch generated significant media coverage, with articles in both business and agricultural publications highlighting the innovative approach to rural economic development. The coverage emphasized the personal connection between my own rural background and the foundation's mission, creating a narrative that resonated with readers who understood the challenges of building businesses in small communities with limited resources. Patricia was pleased by the positive media attention and gradually became more supportive of the foundation's work as she recognized the social credibility it provided. She began including information about the foundation in her conversations with friends and colleagues, positioning my philanthropic work as evidence of thoughtful leadership and social responsibility rather than as a missed opportunity to support more traditional causes. The success of both Streamline AI's IPO and the foundation launch marked a turning point in my relationship with David's family and with Denver's broader business community. I had demonstrated that my initial success wasn't accidental or temporary, and that I was committed to using my platform responsibly rather than simply accumulating wealth for personal benefit. Patricia's transformation from skeptical adversary to proud supporter was complete by this point, though it remained rooted primarily in respect for my achievements rather than deep personal affection. She had learned to value my judgment and to trust my decisions about business and philanthropic matters, even when those decisions didn't align with her own preferences or social expectations. The most significant test of our improved relationship came when David and I announced plans to start a family. Patricia's reaction was enthusiastic and genuine, reflecting excitement about becoming a grandmother rather than concerns about social implications or family dynamics. Her response suggested that she had finally accepted me as a permanent and valued member of the Martinez family, rather than as an outsider whose influence needed to be managed or contained. The pregnancy announcement also triggered deeper conversations about family values and priorities that brought Patricia and me closer together than we had ever been. Despite our different backgrounds and approaches to social relationships, we shared common commitments to hard work, education, and creating opportunities for the next generation that aligned our interests as family members and as grandparent and parent. Planning for the baby's future sparked discussions about education, values, and the kind of life we wanted to provide for our children. Patricia's experience raising successful adults in Denver's competitive social environment proved valuable as we thought through questions about balancing privilege with responsibility and ensuring that our children understood the value of work and service regardless of their financial advantages. These conversations revealed aspects of Patricia's character that I had never seen during our earlier conflicts. Behind her social climbing and status consciousness was genuine concern for family welfare and deep commitment to raising children who would contribute positively to their communities. Her advice about parenting and child development came from authentic experience, rather than strategic calculation. The birth of our daughter Emma 6 months later brought the family together in ways that years of attempted reconciliation had not achieved. Patricia's joy in becoming a grandmother transcended any lingering concerns about social positioning or family dynamics, and her relationship with David improved significantly as they bonded over shared excitement about the new baby. Watching Patricia with Emma revealed the warmth and nurturing capacity that had been overshadowed by her anxieties about social status during the early years of my relationship with David. She was a natural grandmother who clearly loved children and found genuine fulfillment in family relationships that weren't complicated by social expectations or strategic considerations. The experience of new parenthood also deepened my appreciation for the support that David's family could provide. Despite our earlier conflicts, Patricia's practical experience with child rearing and her enthusiasm for helping with Emma created a family dynamic that felt more natural and sustainable than the careful politeness that had characterized our interactions for years. As Emma grew from infant to toddler, Patricia became an integral part of our daily lives in ways that would have been unimaginable during the wedding boycott years. She provided reliable childcare when David and I traveled for business, shared parenting, advice based on her own experience, and clearly delighted in her role as grandmother in ways that brought out the best aspects of her personality. The transformation was remarkable not just for its completeness, but for the genuine affection that developed between Patricia and me as we focused on shared goals for Emma's well-being and development. The common ground of wanting the best for our daughter created a foundation for relationship building that proved more durable than the strategic reconciliation attempts that had characterized our earlier interactions. Looking back on the journey from that first awkward family dinner to the warm family relationships we now enjoyed, I could see how both Patricia and I had been changed by the experience of navigating conflict and reconciliation over several years. She had learned to value substance over appearance, and to appreciate people for their character and accomplishments rather than their social credentials. I had learned to maintain my own values while building functional relationships with people, whose motivations I didn't always admire or understand. The most important lesson was recognizing that family relationships could evolve and improve over time if both parties were willing to acknowledge mistakes and commit to better behavior going forward. Patricia's initial rejection of me had been hurtful and wrong, but her eventual acceptance and support became more meaningful because it was earned through demonstrated character and achievement rather than simply granted through family obligation. The success of Streamline AI, the launch of the foundation, and the joy of raising Emma together had created a family dynamic that none of us could have anticipated during those early conflicts. Patricia had become not just a supportive mother-in-law, but a trusted advisor and valued family member whose experience and perspective I genuinely appreciated. The story of our relationship transformation became something of a legend within Denver's business and social communities, with people often citing it as an example of how family conflicts could be resolved through patience, mutual respect, and recognition of shared values. While I remained somewhat uncomfortable with the public attention given to our personal relationships, I appreciated that our experience might encourage other families to work through similar conflicts rather than allowing them to create permanent divisions. As I prepared for Streamline AI's continued growth and the expansion of our foundation's work, I felt grateful for the family support system that had developed around Emma and our shared commitments to business excellence and social responsibility. Patricia's transformation from adversary to ally had enriched our family life and provided David with the resolution of conflicts that had troubled him for years. The journey had taught me that people were capable of significant change when circumstances challenged their assumptions and provided incentives for growth. Patricia's willingness to examine her own prejudices and modify her behavior had made possible a family relationship that brought joy and stability to all of us, proving that even the most difficult interpersonal conflicts could be resolved with time, effort, and genuine commitment to improvement. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.